To get to know Kate's work and also learn about socially engaged art heartbreak, which I feel is a concept that you're going to learn a little bit about today. And so, Kate will introduce her socially engaged practice and how she arrived at the concept of socially engaged art heartbreak, as well as exploring some themes of gravity express, including ruptures and failure. And basically we'll focus on these transitions over the course of Kate's sustained commitment to art and activism, and Gravity Express, which you will have a copy of, captures some of these fragments from Kate and Ciaran Smyth's reflective work together. And then after the session, after the conversation with Kate, we'll have an opportunity to discuss our own experiences of socially engaged heartbreak as well in small groups. So Kate works across printmaking, archiving, large-scale installations, performance, and publishing. She's the co-founder of the transdisciplinary collective Broken Fields, which brings together experience, knowledge, and practice from the fields of socially engaged art, architecture, community work, social movement archiving, activism, research, and writing. Kate co-creates the newspaper, which we've spoken about already, and is also the co-founder of Victoria Brunetta of independent publishing house Dirty Books. She is the co-founder of The People's Kitchen and is also a member of Red Wheelbarrow Productions. And we are going to first see a film that Kate has shared with us. So hopefully Liam will be able to play that film now, and then Kate will join us after the film has played. So I'll give Liam maybe a couple of minutes to get that film. There it is.
Everything I do is with other people. The spaces we create look to build alternatives to the social relations of capitalism. For me, it's not about a particular moment in the future, it's about process. It's the care that is put into the relationships and radical friendships that are the basis of the worlds we are building. What I do aims to blur the false divisions between our internal world and external world. The despair and hope that exists within us is intrinsically linked to despair and hope of dismantling the violent systems in which we live. Now, as I burn out, as those around me burn out, as communities burn out, as streets burn out, as our planet burns out, there has to be another way of us being together, of doing things where we look after ourselves, where self-care and collective care are intrinsically linked. I do not speak of an idea of self-care that has been commodified, promoting an individual and disconnected from our common struggles. I speak of an understanding that the transformation of our world requires the transformation of ourselves. Writer Yvonne Orr describes what needs to be done as an examination of conscience, both individual, societal, and cultural. She also sees the potential of using art to collectively tell a story for the possibility of the world that is dreamt. There isn't always a language for the new worlds we are creating, and that's why arts practice for me is crucial in how I organise. Whether it's print, radio, or cooking, it's about the relationships that are built in the process. For a long time, especially in political spaces, I didn't really voice my opinions as I thought, it will come across too utopian or too idealistic, a dreamer, a hopeless romantic. Now, I no longer care. If this world has to be turned upside down, then just maybe it makes more sense to imagine and build an infrastructure built on the praxis of existing and past struggles around the world and the care of the relationships within this process, rather than one is an anarchist, a commoner, or a Marxist. As the wheels of the neoliberal machine plough on, in resistance to a system that does not care and will not care, if we have anything, it's the ability to be honest with each other, and that honesty builds the best relationships and the darkest humour. We must collectively create alternative social imaginaries, and these must be the spaces from which we work. Space for our future vision alongside a critical analysis of the global system which perpetuates itself. In the turning of the world upside down, value is at its core. What do you value? If care has never been valued, the chances of us valuing care within how we work is pretty slim. So where are the alternative narratives? We need alternative platforms of communication. How does grassroots organising begin to control the printing press? Currently, I'm working with Common Ground, an arts organisation in Dublin 8. Dublin 8 is an area in Dublin that for me has been crucial in understanding what a revolutionary intersection of art and activism for over 30 years can really look like. As one of my mentors in Dublin 8, Rita Fagan, would say, it is art by the community, not community art. Currently, I'm working on building a platform for radio, print and film. I am doing nothing new. I am interested in learning from what has been built for a very long time and connecting these stories and sharing their values nationally and internationally. My other mentor, John Bissett, who wrote the book Regeneration, Public Good or Private Property, always asks the question, who is this for? We all know the story, often described as poor people on rich land, as areas of our cities that once took no place or of priority within the state and private interests inevitably become sites of hyper-gentrification, and a systematic strategic process of displacing people unfolds, which has been planned for many years with encoded documents that are meant to never be read by those that they affect. The common story is our common struggle. This is why the Just City Collective, How Much Is Enough, is an international network. It took me a long time to meet people where I could be like, so, are you up for the revolution too? And that connection of really believing in alternative worlds, and yes, being aware of the deep systemic structural violence that is embedded in every corner of our social and political structures, but at the same time, believing that another world is possible because they exist all around the world. Such a process of turning things upside down reflects what Mbembe would describe as turning the imperial archive against itself. Archiving, publishing, radio, film, all these mediums are always going to be really important for building critical mass. It's a long, slow process, but we desperately need alternative platforms and structures, and lots of these can be built by joining together all the existing small and large-scale alternative ways of organising that exist all around us. Finally, what gets me excited has always been talking about the revolution, which takes many forms. What gets me excited is the collective energy that happens around struggles for a different world. Learning about people around the world fighting and winning. Alternatives to capitalism exist everywhere. Of course, we are socialised to believe that there is no alternative.
Hi everyone. I can't believe I'm getting to play on the same stage as Alva Smith and Chrissy Tiller. This is incredible. So I'm so glad, so glad to be here. And I think just that conversation that we got to experience was for me what it's all about. And I think we're standing always on shoulders of giants. And I think Alva gave a good context from where Ireland has come from. And I think my mother is a really good example of someone who, separated before it was even legal in 1990. And, she went through her whole struggle and journey for me to be able to actually have such privileges that I have now, as have so many people like Alva and Chrissy. So I think that also points to a lot of what I'm going to talk about, is how my work really has gone towards thinking about living archives and how we create community-led archives. And for me, it's it's that kind of just resisting and challenging the constant need to reinvent the wheel. So I think for me, one of the most liberating moments was when I realized I'm not doing anything new at all. So I'm going to, hopefully that's going to turn into a PowerPoint. Oh, it does. Wow. Cool. I want to use the laser pointer because I've never gotten to use one. Now, only Carly. So I'll go into that juicy heartbreak stuff, but first, just to give, I guess, when we talk about the limits of words and the limits of language, I think it's always interesting to just get an insight into the doing and the practice. And I think, like our conversations around hope this morning, Mariam Kaba would say that the hope is in the doing. And I think for me, that kind of there's always that tension between the doing and the thinking, and we need both. But in resisting the kind of, I guess, a paralysis by analysis, for me, it's been really important to play with theory and play with practice. And I love words, but I also we've got on a tough journey together. And I guess growing up, I would have thought I didn't know anything, and I would have been kind of mortified that I never had really any great opinions or answers. And then as I've gotten into growing up in my practice, I've actually realized that's okay. It's actually for me a lot about questions. And my practice and what I do happens in lots and lots of different places with lots of different people. But the thing that I try to thread through all of it is these three questions. Who is it for? Where does it come from? And how much is enough? And I guess also, a lot of great activists and people would talk about this idea of digging where you stand, so really starting from where you are, and that idea of building on the shoulders of giants and struggles and revolutions, and keeping the hope for me is actually just sharing the stories together and understanding that these fights have been going on for a long time and they continue to go on. So where does it come from? Which actually came from a compost project, because I do a compost project. I was thinking very literally about compost. But then the longer you just stick with the question, for me, it's actually thinking about, where does anything come from? So for me, when I bring around a lot of travelling archives in suitcases, I lost the wheel off a suitcase the other day, so I need to upgrade my travelling archive system. But it's actually a lot of the hopelessness I feel can come from, feeling quite isolated within community organising. So for me, even understanding the histories of each movement and actually getting to, even hearing Alva and Chrissy Tiller talk about trajectories of slow movements is the beauty of this thing about the potential of a living archive. How much is enough? For me, was talking specifically first about something to do with housing, but then was really about actually what are the breaking points. So how much can communities be pushed by the state or private interests or any of these things, or how much can people be pushed before they either burn out, fight back, or whatever else is available. So I think similarly, who is it for? Came from working in Dublin 8 around housing, but more now as I kind of mentor artists or organisers around things like Socially Engaged Art Heartbreak and the struggles of the day-to-day work. It's also thinking about that it also has to be for you. It's always solidarity. It's not charity. And I think a lot of the times within organising and within the play can be forgotten, and actually how you got into things in the first place. So it's I guess that is very connected to Gravity Express, because that was the first time I actually got to stop and look back and actually look at a 12-year arc in my life and think about why I do what I do. So just to say, for me, systemic change takes lifetimes and a turning of the world upside down. So I really see everything that I do as one big project, and I've always found it challenging to divide things up. Obviously you do for funding applications and stuff, but it's all about the same thing. And that was part of doing Gravity Express and looking at 12 years, was actually how do I find the language to kind of justify and talk about that kind of work, and value, time, the social imaginary. These are all, we live in a very upside down world, so all these things are constantly, I guess, being questioned and being rethought when we're organising, with similar to everything that was talked about by Alva and Chrissy. So for me, it's all about the heart. It's about heart-led practice, and I led to figuring out how to talk about heart-led practice and socially engaged art heartbreak and all these dirty emotional things that academia hates, because I could see there was this gap between what I was seeing and experiencing in the fields of organising and socially engaged practice and how things were presented, which we'll get on. I'm going to be sharing you some clips connected to Gravity Express that will go into that in a little bit more detail. But first, I just wanted to give an idea of a very recent project, which is, say, 2 years after Gravity Express. It's also a few years after the film that I played at the start, which was really just, I guess, me figuring out a way of explaining what I do and my voice, and then asking a friend to glitch together different projects and make a very short, very quick DIY film that was kind of trying to give this idea of how everything's connected and it's all one project. So I guess for me, I'm always working in one-to-one relationships that are connected in networks. So this Revolutionary Archivists was a project I did very recently between the Isle of Egg, which is a community buyout island in the north of Scotland, and Govan Hill Baths, which came out of an occupation in Glasgow that I'm sure everybody knows about. And for me, this was the moment where I was like, oh, I think I really get now the value of what I can do within this whole thing of archiving and community-led archiving. So it also allowed me to say, no, I'm not going to work with loads and loads and loads of people. I'm actually just going to work with 6 people who were on the front lines of the occupation and 6 people who were on the front lines of the community buyout of the Isle of Egg. And for me, it's that thing of really actually properly acknowledging the work of our elders and the struggle, and how hard these fights were, I can't even say that, how hard those fights were won, when it can become a lot of this, because within activism and organising, the speed is so fast that often it's not, there is no time for archiving. So I feel like a lot of the people can go through a whole lifetime of doing this amazing work, but then not actually getting the space and time to even look back or value what they've done. So this is just some of the work I made with people, but I think one that's quite interesting and ties into a lot of what I'm talking about, it's also on my back, is this Where We Stand print, and what's in it is actually the rotas from the picket line of the 140-day occupation of Govan Hill Baths, which was the longest occupation of a public building. And for me, that's the work, that's the labour, that's the organising. It's the 24-hour picket line. It's these handwritten names, and it's like the fact that they were kept. And I think that actually shows. It's like that's the labour. It's the day-to-day organising, and it's the art of that and the art of organising. And I guess for me, I don't ever distinguish between art and organising and the revolution and playing and all of those things. So spending time with people who did this work and figuring out how to actually just value actually what happened, not even asking people to come and sort out what the next generation is doing. It's actually, let's just actually talk about what happened, and that each person within these moments has a very different story. So, for example, this is Maggie Fife, who's a total legend on the Isle of Egg, and this is Maggie's table, and this was me with Lucy Conway talking to Maggie, and it's just the level of organising that all happened around that kitchen table is where, and that's where the work is. And that was a very, very long struggle through landlords, and eventually is now in a community land trust. And I was all about the archives and the living archives, and then everyone was like, we kind of just want jackets. So we did both. So kind of give the people what they want. So that's Maggie Fife wearing the jacket that is very happy with this. It's Govan Hill Bats on one side and the Isle of Egg on the other side. So that was Maggie. This is Sue Kirk, who then, so she actually wasn't involved in the day-to-day organising around Maggie's table. She occupied and opened a shop on the island because they had no infrastructure, no resources, due to the loads of shite landlords, the last of which was a German conceptual artist. So not all artists can be trusted. Very important to note. But Sue Kirk, she was like, my revolution was opening the shop. So, and that the shop was the social space, and actually that was the heart of it. And this is Paula Larkin, who's the archivist in Govan Hill, and Fatima, Fatima was on the picket line and involved from the start. Paula built up the kind of resources to actually archive the whole thing for a very long time. But they were, in this moment when we were presenting the project, telling the story through the jackets, and it just made me very happy. So I guess that's just a little window to show what it is about for me. It's about actually people who do the work and are like doing the hard stuff, getting to have their individual story within the collective story. And actually it's slow work, and it's one person and one story at a time. And I'm going to go on to Gravity Express, and what I'm going to play first is, so back in 2022 when myself and Ciaran Smyth, who was my incredible mentor, who's the reason this exists, because I was able to really trust him to psychologically vomit everything out on paper and audio recordings first, and then get a pared back fit for public newspaper. And that is really about trust and time and space. So we presented this at Cork Midsummer Festival on stage in 2022, which was absolutely terrifying. But I'm going to show Ciaran do the bit of an intro, and then I'm going to tell you some more. I think it should happen.
So myself and Kate started working, I think, in November of last year, so in the Zoom-based lockdown. And there was a 12-year arc of review on this whole idea of, I think part of Kate's interest was the way when people talk about socially engaged art practice, it's usually a good news story. Everything went well. And we wanted to sort of interrupt that and introduce some of the personal experiences of things going wrong, and sort of include a sort of like an honest account of that in a way. And so what we did is we used, first of all, a thing called preoccupational features, which is literally what's on your mind about your practice. And so Kate, I have to say, Kate was a phenomenal mentee in terms of the amount of work and seriousness she brought to the process. But so preoccupational features are things that about your practice you're thinking about and worrying about, or maybe they're kind of on your mind. And the other part was inertial features. So these are things about your practice that you want to hang on to, that you want to preserve and conserve. We did that. And we also began to think about introducing a song cycle, which came out of just at the very first session when I was working with Kate. I got that impression of an artist who has got a big canvas of concerns, and a lot of Kate's concerns are around the violence of post-industrial capitalism and the sort of dominance of market-based thinking and so on. As always with artists, there's a sort of commitment, a huge ambition in practice against these sort of macro systems. And it reminded me, the first song, I sort of after the session, I sent Kate a song by the Flaming Lips called Yoshima battles the pink robots. And so Yoshimi is a superhero who's taking on the city, taking vitamins. She's a black belt in karate, and she is guaranteeing that the city will be saved from the evil robots. So it was kind of like a metaphor for that particular positioning, if you like. And then after that, Kate insisted on having a song after each session, and so that we ended up with a song cycle from the mentoring. So if you'll see in each of your seats, there's a tabloidish publication called Gravity Express, and you'll see that the song cycle is on the back page of that. So those are the kind of devices that we used. I would like to say that in the paper that you have, there's 6 fragments, which are themes like falling, failing, wiring, radical friendship, and so on. They really are fragments. In other words, the conversational drift of the mentoring spanned a whole lot of different things, and we wouldn't pretend that the newspaper you have captures or represents that, but we thought we'd try and just make some of them public and sort of share them as a sort of critical window into some of the things around social practice.
So, that clip was longer, sorry. So I'm actually just going to read a little bit from, it's interesting now because this is a couple years ago, so I now probably think of Socially Engaged Art Heartbreak in much more of a collective sense, or people in all sorts of different contexts, but it obviously came from a very personal experience of collaborative breakdowns, but then also breakdowns between organizations and different things. And again, this rupture between what was being said and what was practiced. So I read this for the first time this morning in ages, and I was like, whoa, I didn't hold back. So I'll read it again. So, Socially Engaged Art Heartbreak. This has been a major preoccupation in figuring out survival in the field. See Heartbreak is how I've come to explain the heartbreak of falsity in the field of art and activism. How do you put a language on what it means to be betrayed in socially engaged art? It is the breakdown of collaborative relationships that are built on certain assumptions of trust and friendship and values that reveal themselves to be contradictory in practice. Here is a sentence from my notebook. Getting betrayed by someone for the first time in socially engaged art is like a breakup. Trust, friendship, and work all smashed into tiny pieces. The second time is different. By the third time, you begin to see the power structures at play. Now I can see that each of my C heartbreaks unfolded within unequal power relations. I thought each person had a practice which was similar to mine, aligned politically and ethically, but that was only a shared language. This has led to my focus on the limits of language and an often dramatic disconnect between theory and practice. Reading from my notebook again, the process of C heartbreak is individualized and very isolating, but underneath it all, it turns out it actually has nothing to do with you. It's about egos and power relations that have been playing out long before you arrived on the scene. So I think I actually remember meeting Emily from Heart to Glass when I was like, I have this thing that I'm thinking about doing a show. It's about socially engaged art heartbreak in Dublin. And Emily was like, oh yeah, that's real. So then I think that gave me the courage, along with other people, to keep going. And I guess it's also important in terms of thinking about words failing and the limits of language, and that also it's about also the thing of giving people a chance who don't have the right language, because sometimes it's actually the people who can have the correct language who will do a lot of violence, and things can be very upside down. So for me, I guess in your early days when you meet people who are sharing a same language, you can kind of fall head over heels. But it's a whole process of actually understanding and building, I guess, your army, and that's where radical friendship comes in, and which is kind of, I guess, is a bit of the antidote, but also it's strengthened by the existence of the heartbreak, in that you understand what works within organising or what works within any social justice work when you really fight with people at the front lines, and you are I guess sharing space and time together, whereas it's easy to kind of read something and then think this is where it's at. So am I already over time? Oh no, that's okay. Okay, I'll go on to the next clip.
There's a whole section in the newspaper on failure, which was interesting to explore, because myself and Kate kind of came up with a different term, which was the word rupture, which is kind of more useful in a way. And the idea is that, when things fall apart in a certain way, you dust yourself off and you walk away from that. But when we were reflecting on the different things you've done, Kate, it seemed clear that each rupture was like a creative threshold where everything was no longer the same and you wouldn't do things in the same way. So there was I know we were kind of, like, let's say, reclaiming failure as a form of learning, which is a scandalous project. But there was that element of reviewing and reframing certain things that I think you now see as more kind of transformational moments, maybe, than...
Yeah. I started to look at the ruptures over the 12 years. I got taking the starting point is, I'd say, rupture 1 was dropping out of architecture college, and starting a cafe with Aoife, who's probably, I think, is here, Scanlon, in Kerry, and then say we had that for 6 years, and it was everything we dreamed of, and it was amazing, and then we lost the land, so then it's like a massive rupture. And then what does that mean? But then I guess our lives become another thing that they wouldn't have if you had the thing, and then it just becomes this whole looking back. And then other ruptures, like, I guess, say the 2 years that I've spent in Dublin 8 have been massively transformative, where I met Ciaran, and this is how all this process started.
So I just realised I had different cuts where I was meant to say the next bit that was going to remind me what to say. But yeah, as a process of working with Ciaran through the ruptures was really kind of incredible, again, to actually look back at your life and kind of figure out what are the things that actually got you here and do what you do. So not the CV or not the general stuff that you present, but actually the stuff that, I guess, gives you the fight and the heart to want to change the world or turn things upside down collectively. And I think I in the clip that I obviously didn't include, I started to talk about thinking about, so when I finished school, I studied architecture, dropped out. That was a big rupture, was the end of the world. And then I started a cafe in rural Ireland, which I ran for 6 years on my father's land, which is probably the roots. I think that's also why I don't really separate anything, because I did that kind of creating of a community social space before I knew being an artist was a thing. But then I got, because I don't know, has everyone seen The Field by John B. Keane? But it's very important for understanding our relationship to land. So I was disinherited. It was given to the brother, and I lost the cafe, and that was a massive rupture. But then I ended up, working with amazing organisers and being in the heart of Dublin 8 with people like Danielle and all these legends, where it was actually in the heart of Dublin 8 that I understood the spatial injustices of, say, rural Ireland, and how our histories of colonisation is interlinked to addiction and land, and all this stuff is all messed up in the soil beneath where we stand. And I kind of had to, which often happens, I think you have to go away to figure this out, and I would be like that, super influenced by artists and organisers from far away before I was able to find my thing in Ireland. And I guess now it's like actually that, both the history of my early depression in my earlier years, the history of losing the cafe, that's actually all the stuff, the big messy stuff that forms the reason I'm able to work in the way that I do. So and again, I guess thinking about that in relation to radical friendship, which might be the next clip if I did it right, is actually that it's actually the kind of the shit shows and the breakdowns and all the messy stuff that makes really, really amazing bonds and friendships and going through the struggle together. And that's actually what makes a lot of the organising and the work and the magic and the driocht is it doesn't have a direct translation really in English, but it's I guess that kind of the magic, so the thing you can't really put a word on, but that kind of what creates the spaces, the kind of social spaces, and what's actually the layers and layers that creates these things that are kind of, I guess, beneath the surface of how stuff is usually presented. And I guess that was much of the reason for doing the newspaper, was actually the stuff that I was figuring out, I was seeing play out a lot of the all around me, and actually let's figure out a way of acknowledging and talking about this in a more public way. So it's like, well, still to this day, I get WhatsApps being like, "Can I talk to you about a socially engaged art heartbreak?" But you know, it is even that, like the making up of words when you don't have them is interesting in itself. So.
What I really liked about the honesty that Kate brought to it was a conversation against the idea of the professional hero, the way in which you have to construct yourself these days. Let's say in an interview narrative where I did this and then it seemed logical to do this, and you polish over the cracks and produce this kind of rational subject who always knew what they were intending to do. And obviously things are a lot messier than that. And I really liked the way Kate sort of analysed and engaged with that. And that was very interesting because we kind of realised something quite, I thought, like an insight into your practice, if you will, that, you know, in every situation in this kind of form of art, you're always encountering new people. But it became clear in reflecting on your practice over the last 12 years that you have a crew. And so there's a distinction between, you've got this very nice definition of radical friendship as people who are always looking out for the best for you, which is very different from the kind of, let's say, institutional corporate relations that exist in terms of, let's say, other forms of work. And so that kind of, I think, became a clear distinction on the radical friendship part of it.
So I'm just going to read this section from the conversation about radical friendship. So there's like just a fragment. So I guess this process with Ciaran happened like lots of conversations over a period of time, and then we decided to record some of them and distill it into a newspaper. But for me, it was just really important to actually find language and words to talk about the things that were important, even though I'm often making spaces where it's trying to actually find ways outside of words and language to work, to do things. But I think it is also really important to also reclaim words as well, in that like every word is going to be co-opted and commodified at some level. So for me, it's always this over and back between to reclaiming words or making them up together. So the words printed on this cup are from a written piece, Friendship, Hope and Surprise, by Gustavo Esteva Gustavo, who is an amazing grassroots activist and self-described deprofessionalized intellectual, who's now in his 80s. When I asked him to write for Dirty Words in 2018, he chose to write about friendship. I love this quote from his contribution. "We need to cultivate disciplined, self-denying, careful, tasteful friendships, which are today the key, the powerful force, the stuff radiating out of the communal spirit for the rebirth of the commons." I like to use that quote as an example when I'm talking about radical friendship, because he really speaks to the political practice of friendship in alternative social imaginaries. For me, that's always been important. I've always focused on my relationships, like social relationships with friends and the people I collaborate with. Radical friendship for me is a way of describing the people you will go to war with. Maybe I should say the people who will go to war with me. They are, if you will, those who understand me at every level and that I understand at every level. Because you've been through some wars together, you really trust each other. For me, it's not actually about, here's some humans with very impressive CVs. It's more about what she was, when she was having that mental breakdown or I was having some hard times, we really helped each other. It's about how friendship makes really strong work in these cases. In the world of professionalisation, it's not really like that. You need to separate radical friendship from that world. I guess I have very specific relationships that I would frame within that idea of radicality. We would share, for example, a deep understanding around a critique of capitalism. You can start out with shared assumptions around things like that, and then you're working from there. In the case of radical friendship, you're also very understanding when someone needs time out. So I think I might leave it there because I know we're going to have a big session, but just to say it really is a pleasure to have followed Alva and Chrissy, and thanks for inviting me. And I always think in moments like this of Grace Lee Boggs, who is also a big influence of me, and she always said that we are the leaders we've been waiting for. So